Hey, pals, welcome back to another episode of the Pool Box Pals podcast. My name is Monk, and if you're watching the video, you'll happen to notice that our good pal Mad is missing. But just like last week when I was missing, we were able to have some people come on through and fill in that gap. But Mad just had one guy fill in the spot. But me, being an overdoer and an egomaniac, I decided to kick it up a notch and have two people on. So take that, Mad. I'm just kidding. I don't know why I made this a competition. But yeah, we have some awesome creators here with us. Yeah, so we have Mike Dean and Tim Radecki. Oh man. So I just want everyone to know I even asked before we started. And yeah, so if it makes you feel any better, I married my best friend. Not like I didn't get married to him. I did the ceremony and I screwed up his wife's last name. And her like whole family laughed because they're Filipino and they're like, oh, look at the white guy screw up the Filipino name. But you know, that's how it goes. Anyways, thanks for being here, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This is great.
Oh, no problem. I'm very stoked. When we started the podcast sometime back, you know, like you're just on you make a little Instagram and then you try to like, you know, see who's out there in the comic book world. One of the first things I came across was Superbuds. So, you know,
Awesome.
If that should make you very happy knowing that your ISO was working.
It worked.
Yeah, whatever you're doing.
I think you posted something on 420 and I was like, dude, I think I've got the book for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's very funny. We try not to be a weed-centric podcast, but that's me and Mad both indulge, and we've talked about that on previous episodes. But yeah, it's just funny that a couple of like stoner comics have come across us like very like organically, which has been very nice. You know, maybe there's just connection in the universe, and we're all out there finding each other.
It's a nice overlap for sure.
Yeah. I mean, love, there's nothing wrong with smoking a little bit and then reading a comic because then you get to like reread that comic at one point in time and you're like, oh, wow, I read this.
That happened.
Yeah. Or just you get like a fun experience twice. You get your money's worth twice. Nothing wrong with that.
At it. Yeah, you get your money's worth that way.
I remember when Tim and I lived together, that was like, because it was him, myself, and a third comic book nerd. And so between the three of us, we had this extensive collection of comics. And so like sometimes it'd just be like an entire weekend would just be like, I'm going to read Avengers vs. X-Men and not leave the house for 6 hours.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Speaking of Outer Space, the comics has Stoner Comics Assembled. Outer Space is one of the other comics that I was referring to. They reached out to us. We've had them on, reviewed the comic, and it's about there's an intergalactic, like, aliens come and they kind of like obliterate the first like line of defense, and then everything after that is just kind of like just the normal people of society, and it's focused around these stoners that get drafted and have to go fight this like intergalactic battle.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
I'll check that out as soon as we're done. Let me put that in here.
Yeah, so check it out. I mean, you'll come back to the comics or the comments. You'll see them in there. But we're big fans of them. We're also friends with them. So yeah, shout out to them for coming on through. But you just kind of gave like a little bit of a sneak peek. You said that you guys live together. But before we get to that, I would love to know how you like each got into comics. Is it something that you grew up with, or did you just kind of? I found comics when I was in my 20s, like. Yeah, just I'm one of the people that fell victim to the Avengers movie, and yeah, I mean it was one of the best things that could have happened to me because I love comic books, you know. But how'd you guys get into them?
Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been a lifelong fan. I grew up with an older brother who was really into superheroes and that kind of thing. He wasn't actually a big comic book reader, but like loved all of like the TV shows. So from the earliest age, I knew of all those characters and loved those. And then when I was like 3 or 4, I spied a comic book shop across my doctor's office. And my mom coaxed me into going to the doctor's by saying, all right, you can go over there and pick out a comic.
So that's a good deal.
Yeah. So I've been into comics ever since then. And it was like, through middle school and high school, kind of dropped out a little bit in high school, not really reading as much. And then met up with Mike and a couple of our other buddies in college, and they were comic fans. And that was kind of where I was like, oh, there's other people that are into comics, because none of the guys I hung out with in high school were really into it. They all loved going to see the X-Men or Spider-Man movie, but then would, joke about me reading comics all the time. But I was like, oh, there's other dudes that are into this nerdy stuff too. So just definitely fell back in love with it when there was a bunch of us that were hanging out, and we could all kind of scrape together a couple bucks and chip in for comics and like pass them around. We'd go to the shop on a Wednesday, and all right, I'll pick up a couple books, you pick up a couple books, and then we'd each be able to read like 8 or 9 books that way.
That's awesome. Yeah, I used to live with a guy who was an illustrator, and he didn't do comics necessarily. He was more of just like a graphic designer or what have you. But he did do like shorts and web comics and the like. And we would do that like on Friday nights. We would just like get some pizza and then just sit around and just like what I really enjoyed was like that we would read the same thing. So like we would we would get our comics off the internet somehow, and I won't say whether it was legally or not.
Somehow.
Somehow we found ourselves reading the most current comics of the week online. But this was when I was in college, so if that makes anything better. But yeah. Anyways, we would just sit and like we would read the same thing. I remember one of the ones that we read was a Thanos comic, and then just like we just walked down to like the 7-Eleven and just like talk about it. We would eat pizza while reading the comics and then go to the 7-Eleven for more food. But I mean, that's what being in college is like. But
I really enjoy it more that way too, because you got that kind of experience of, okay, what did you get out of it? Oh, I didn't think of that, like that kind of thing. Yeah.
What did you see?
Awesome.
What? Because again, like I really love like good art. Obviously, is very important, but like for me, I'm a sucker for like a good story. I think that'll hook me. I'll be willing to forgive art if the like story kind of keeps me going.
Yeah.
And he being an illustrator, like obviously like he was taking a lot more time of like just like looking and soaking in the art and like appreciating how they like decided to represent movement in that panel or what have you. So it was, it's just and we say this all the time on the podcast, is just our favorite thing about about podcasting, about comic books, is being able to find other people to just chat comic books about, because it is like very like you can have lots of friends who are into like the movies and all that stuff, but the people who are like willing to go to the source of it all, like they're kind of a little bit harder to find, which is interesting because I'm like, if you like these guys, like, do you know how many Wolverine comics there are? If you like Wolverine, like just an infinite amount. Like, why would you not treat yourself to that? But
that was I had a similar origin story to Tim. Older brother got me into the comic book characters. He would kind of fill me in. I probably already loved like the cartoons from the 60s, like Spider-Man, His Amazing Friends, the older Spider-Man, like what was that X-Men one? It was like Pride of the X-Men has the pilot Kitty Pryde, and like you had like very limited options when you went to like Suncoast Video or Blockbuster to go get like rent cartoons. But I remember I wanted to have comics like my brother, and the first one my dad got me, we went to this place called Count Dracula's Comic Book Crypt over in Lynbrook.
That's a dope name.
Yeah, right?
We kind of did a little homage to that with
we did. Yeah,
super fun.
Oh, that's awesome. We'll get to that later. Maybe write that down. We'll come back to that.
Come back to it.
But so I was like begging my dad. I was like, I want a comic book like Doug. And so the first thing he got me was The Hobbit as a graphic novel. And then read it to me in like the voices. It was really great. And then like, I should see if I still have that one. Great art. But that was kind of the first, and then I just would go any chance I got and got new comics. And even before I really was like reading at a competent level, I just liked looking at the art.
God, that's so cool. I'm so jealous. I wish I would have, like, obviously I grew up with like cartoons and like the movies and like yada yada yada, but like to just have that experience of like going to the comic book shop as a kid, I'm sure like literally it feels like I'm a kid in a candy shop now. So like I couldn't imagine like the just serotonin, like dopamine rush that you're getting as like a child of just, you're seeing all these things. What now? I'm very curious. This is kind of, it's kind of on topic, not off topic. We're talking about comic books and it's about comic books. But did you guys stick with DC and Marvel, or did you find yourself going into indie things, or what did that look like for you? Because I'm very curious.
I think I was mostly just DC and Marvel growing up, and then I didn't really discover the other, comic book publishers probably until college.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't have a favorite of DC or Marvel. I read both. And then I had a few comics in that first run with like Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld were doing their books, and like Spawn was one that I had a few issues of, but I wasn't like a diehard Image fan. It was really mostly DC and Marvel.
Nice. Now, do you still today keep up with them?
I'm like the exact opposite now. I do love what they're doing, but I honestly haven't read a Marvel or DC book in a few years.
Sure.
I mean, the ones I have picked up are like in trade backs, and they're 2 or 3 years old now. So I'm like, did you guys read this one that James Tynion did 3 years ago? Or, this Jason Aaron Thor run from 8 years ago is really good.
I mean, it is very good, and I think that's like the thing with like I think there's like this stigma around comic, and maybe stigma is the wrong word, but people very much like issue number ones that are like, this came out in 2023 or whatever. Like they like modern, like what is the newest one where it's like the trade paperback's just sitting there, like you can go to it, it's just as fun, like even though it's not like quote unquote new, like the story is, if it's a good story, it should be like pretty evergreen, like unless like it's about a timely topic, but even then it should still be evergreen, But, and I didn't like say that to try to set you up and be like, gotcha, where are you at with it now? Because we talk about that a lot on the podcast. Obviously, like me and my co-host Mad, we mostly read independents and we try to get into Marvel. So that's why I was curious, because just seeing like, what was it like, back then, of just like, was it easier to get into these things because they were just kind of going then versus now? It just feels a lot easier to like dive into like indie comics and just pick up an issue number one and read something pretty simple,
Yeah, I think there's always been like an ebb and flow with the indie comics. If you look back in like the 70s, there was a big run, and then the 80s it came back, and then in the 90s there was a lot of like post that initial Image burst of all those creators coming together. There were a lot of other indie comics that were coming out in the 90s, and then I think after The Walking Dead there was a resurgence in that, and that's kind of what Mike and I at that time, we were living together in 2008 and 9. We were reading all of it. We were reading DC and Marvel, but especially all of the new Image comics, and that kind of got us into the idea of possibly getting into writing comics. Was okay, there's more to write than just superheroes. There's more than just DC and Marvel. It felt like it was always cool to look at from the outside, but it was like, I don't know if there's space for us in that kind of world. And then once Image kind of blew up with that like second wave Image, that resurgence of Image, it's like, there are other stories out there to be told, and there's other things, like you can be an independent comic book maker again, and the process has only gotten easier now with like digital printing and even just digital art, where it used to take people forever to do pencils on paper, and then they would ink, and then if you messed up you'd have to start all over again. Now it's just like click of the mouse, backspace, get rid of it, and that kind of thing. So I think that has made it a little bit easier for everybody to, like, the entry point is a little bit easier. It's more accessible.
Right. Which I think is great. I know we've talked about this on the podcast before, but I don't understand why it's so hard to get into, like, why Marvel and DC don't push their comics. Everyone knows their name, like their household names, but it seems like they're very focused on like their IP. Like, here's Batman, here's like that, instead of being like, hey, there's all these stories, if you like these characters, everyone wants to see Batman, everyone wants to see Superman, but I'm like, I can see them whenever I want, and so, look at that. Our buddy Matt came on through to say, hey, pals.
Hey, what's up?
Hope you're enjoying your night off. But yeah, so that's cool. I really appreciate your insight on that, because it is something that we talk about a lot, is just what is, we think a lot about like people who are coming to comic books now. Is it easier for them to just go right to the indie section and start browsing? But even like you were saying, like, you go to Kickstarter and you type in comics, and there's more than you can like ever like dream to find, And
that's kind of where I'm at right now. I was all the way through until COVID. Basically, I was in the shops buying my indie comics at the shop, and then during COVID, it was just tougher to get into a shop. Everybody was kind of shutting down and stuff. And that's where I've kind of switched over to like, oh, let me check out what other indie comics were out there. We were already on Kickstarter, and I had backed a couple that I had liked and stuff, but primarily the comics I'm reading now come from Kickstarter because it's cool to just back other indie creators. I think they're doing something that's a little bit more outside of the realm of normal. It's just a little bit more interesting.
Right.
And I just kind of bought into that kind of whole process right now. So.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely been enjoying that process as well of like just finding what's out there, what stories have to be told. And again, it's like, we've said this 1,000 times, like we have nothing against Marvel and DC. It's more of just how are we, what's the easiest way to get into a story? What's the accessibility for this, And I do just kind of think just being able to go and like, it's not as hard, because I think people kind of understand the concept of a comic now,
Yeah.
I think maybe because comics are so kind of the idea of comics are mainstream. I don't know if comics are mainstream, but I think the idea of comics, but yeah, again, this is probably another topic that we could chat about for forever. But so you guys, when did you guys meet? I'm sorry if you said that and I missed it, but mind going back to that?
We met in college, in film school, actually.
Right.
And we met because our mutual friend, Mike O'Brien, him and I we were roommates at the time, and we would go to the comic book store in Bethlehem. Actually, I was just trying to think, what was the name of that store? Do you remember, Tim?
Dreamscape.
Dreamscape. We'd go to Dreamscape Comics in Bethlehem. And he invited Tim one time, and I was like, okay, but we're still going for milkshakes after. That's
part of the deal.
And we would go and head over and get comics, and we'd come back, and we'd all just be sitting there, three nerds in a dorm room, drinking milkshakes and reading comics.
You can imagine the smell coming out of that room.
Yeah, I would imagine. You get young men together, and it's not going to smell good. Pretty much until 20-something. But that's fantastic, man. I really do like it's really is like awesome to have like a community of like comics and just like having people like reach out to that. We have that like online, but like, and I'm friends with like the people at my comic book store, but like we don't meet up to, I see them at the comic book store. We're not meeting up to like go to ones,
Definitely.
So.
I got to get back to my comic book shop because I used to love that. Like on Wednesday when you go in and be like chat about the books that came out the previous Wednesday, and it was like, okay, I haven't seen these guys. Yeah. We don't even know each other that well, but we see each other in here every Wednesday. Right. What did you think of this comic? Kind of catch up in that really brief conversation, and sometimes you get good recommendations. So definitely cool to have that kind of chat in the shop as well.
I think that's part of how I fell off, to be honest. Is when I lived in Philly, we would go to Brave New Worlds, and Rob and Brian there, I would ask for recommendations every time I went in because there'd be plenty of like stuff I could find in the indie section, but they kind of both knew my taste. So I was like, hey, I'm looking for something kind of like the supernatural scape. I remember they recommended so many good titles to me, like Witches that Scott Snyder did. He was the first person to put that in my hands, and
nice.
Handful of really great titles.
Yeah. I mean, that's like great. I do definitely feel like the people at my comic shop that they know what I like, and it's like it's definitely like a part of that conversation, and they never take it personally. Like when I'm like, I didn't really like it, they didn't write it, like it's not like I was like, it was just like, it's good to have that conversation, and then they can like learn. They can see like, okay, this was good. We're gonna keep bringing this in, whatever. I think my comic book shop does a fantastic job of like knowing what their clientele like and working and catering towards them. I think that's super important.
And I've never worked in a comic shop, but it seems like that's a big part of it. If you can get really good at that skill, you could be a successful shop. Or if you can hire people that are really good at that, not only do you know the best books that are out there, but you know who your clientele are, and you know how to match them with the right book. I think that's such a huge skill, and not easy to do.
Yeah, and I would imagine you'd have to get like you have to get very good at getting your own biases out of the way, right? Of not being like, I think this is the best comic, like of being like, okay, what do you like? I know they like this kind of comedy or like this kind of art, whatever it is. It's So But I guess that kind of brings me into, when did you guys feel like you like wanted to start writing together then? Like what did those early conversations look like?
Yeah, so Mike and I were both in school. It was like a film school, and we were kind of doing like the writer director kind of thing, like both on our own path. Like serious, like at the time in the early 2000s, like those art house indie movies that were coming out, like Fox Searchlight, Miramax kind of things. And then we were just hanging out one night. A bunch of us were all hanging out, and I kept pitching like, oh, I think we should do a sketch comedy group. And Mike and I were really like, everybody else was gung ho, but we were the only ones that wanted to actually sit down and write. And I was like, okay, I think I got another writer here. And that was kind of where we first started to collaborate, not thinking like we were going to be writing together. The future was just a fun thing to do on the side when we were hanging out, in a dorm, drinking a couple of beers, was come up with some ideas. And we started doing that. And then we were kind of just like punching up each other's scripts. And at the time, we were each writing our own stuff, or to direct ourselves. So like everything that I directed, Mike was helping me with the rewrites, and I was helping him with those rewrites. And I feel like we just kind of. I'm sorry, what was that?
And on set too, we both. Projects.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And it seemed like we just had like a good rapport. We kind of trusted each other's opinions in writing. So we're like, hey, do you want to give this a shot and see if we can write something? So we started writing together. We wrote a pilot in our senior year of college. That was kind of where we started like forming that writing partnership. And I feel like that went really well. We were like, let's just try to make a thing of this and see where we can take it.
That's so cool. Like hats off to you guys, because we've talked about this before, me and my co-host, like the idea of like writing. We know, like, when a story is good, but sitting down and being able to be like, I'm going to put out a story now, it's just like impossible, like, because in my head, I'm like, it shouldn't be that hard to think of a guy named Phil and an adventure he goes on. But like, I just can't, like it's just an empty gong up there. I'm like, what's Phil up to? And it's just like nothing. Phil's got nothing going on. I'm like, all right, well then we won't keep knocking down this tree. But
well, that's one of the benefits of being in a writing partnership, which it does seem like it's rare in comics. Probably like from like a payment thing. I don't think you can get paid working with two people splitting that pay, but it does help when you're like, oh, I'm hitting my head against the wall trying to come up with something. There's another person there that can bail you out, and you're like, oh, I didn't think of that, but yeah, that is the obvious answer for that problem that I was like driving myself nuts on for the last couple of days. So you kind of balance each other out in a way.
Right. I definitely think that like comic duos are a very good thing, and I like the most classic one for me is Sean Phillips and Ed Brubaker.
That's exactly what I thought of when you said that. Yeah.
Like, just like they're an unstoppable team, and they've earned their place in like the Hall of Fame of comic book writers, because I think they probably sit down and they're just like, this is our story, and it can be easy, like, and there's nothing wrong with this of having your illustrator come in and do the art that you want and stuff like that. But when you're talking and you're working with them and like being simpatico with each other, like I always seem that like it always feels like that pays off very well. And I can say that you guys do a fantastic job writing. Everything that we've read from you, we've really enjoyed. I was able to get into all 3 issues of Superbud as well, and we've reviewed Grave Brigade sometime back. But yeah, was Superbud the first thing that you guys did together?
Yeah,
it was the first comic. Yeah, we had written like for film and TV and that kind of thing. Yeah, we had written a couple of scripts, and we did a web series and some short films and stuff. But yeah, that was the first comic. We were kind of talking about getting into the comic space and weren't really sure how to do it. And then it was like, well, why don't we try to do something like the books they were doing at Image at the time, which was like, these creator-owned original characters. So we just kind of said, all right, well, we'll wait till we have a really good idea. And then Mike pitched Superbud and was like, okay, that's the one we're going to go all in on.
Nice. Where did Superbud come from for you, Mike?
I mean, I was driving back from a comic convention that I was working at. And, when you're just on like a nice long 2-hour drive and your mind starts to wander to all these different places. And at the time there was only like, maybe one state that was legalized for recreational or just even medical marijuana at the time.
Mm.
And I started thinking more and more about like, well, what's the dominoes that are going to go off here if like big pharma gets involved down the line, and what if they start trying to like create strains that are specifically geared towards illnesses, and what could some of the side effects of these strains be? And then all of a sudden I was like, oh shit, there's going to be a superhero strain. And I came back and I really didn't have much else than that, other than the idea that like, what if someone, because at the time it's like everybody like, oh yeah, this is medical weed, like I got medical weed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if somebody got a hold of this like experimental strain, and then just like random people in your neighborhood who smoke weed started getting powers? Like, what would that look like? And I started talking to Tim about it, and then we started coming up with characters and the world, and a lot of tropes came very natural to us, because like we were just sort of working with what we know, which was like, let's have this character who is a comic book nerd. And of course, anyone else who gets powers would not be like, yeah, I'm going to be a superhero. But of course, this comic book nerd would. Mm-hmm. And we just kind of took it more from there.
Right. I got to say that premise, like one of the things that I love is when you can like sum up a comic in like one or two sentences. What if medical marijuana gave you superpowers? Like, brilliant. Like just being able to just short and condense of being like, this is it. Because sometimes when I do like, I don't know if you guys know this, but I have a podcast about comic books. And sometimes when I do that, it's very hard for me like to condense what the story's about, because I'm like, well, there's this guy, he's on a space station, but then there's a person on a farm, and like he's doing this because like you can't really like sum it up into like, this is the thing that's happening, and again, even like outer space, they do a very good job of just like galactic comes, the aliens come, we need to fight them, stoners are doing it, like very short, easy to understand. I think comics definitely like stumble when they're like trying to like overlap a lot of things, and just make the story more convoluted than it needs to,
Especially if you don't have like a publisher behind you that's going to be pushing the advertising, and like you have a guaranteed 12 issues or something like that. You really want to like catch them in that first issue.
Yeah. And I imagine that it's probably a lot easier to sell, like a 5-issue arc, or like or even like just to be like, this is just this one standalone issue, and then we'll go and do this next standalone thing. But then trying to like, trying to find that balance of like, how many comics do we want to put out, how many do they need for this story, and then again like being able to like have a good like clear premise that like people get hooked on like instantly, and another thing that I would say is I'm very curious to see like how, I would love to know how intricate is this web that you have built out, like the crime scene investigating board that you guys have built for this comic. I would love to know like how far out those red pins go, because when I was reading Superbuds, it seems like there was like a lot of like hints towards things to come, or like this person's, I feel like you put a lot of weed all over the place. I'm like, oh, there's this strain of weed is going all over the place. Who knows who's going to get like their hands on it, or what's going to get their hands on it, like, and I feel like there's a lot of foresight into this. So like, if you could explain that process, I would love to know about that as well.
Yeah, I feel like if you were to make that board in real life, it would look like the board from It's Always Sunny with Charlie, like putting it all around. It is that complex. Like when we started writing this, we didn't really understand the landscape of making comics. I always try to give everybody the advice, like research it, read as much as you can, start small. We didn't really do that. We were like, okay, we're going to make this series. It's going to be like, we thought it was cutting it short by saying it was going to be 36 issues, which is like astronomical to even think of at this point. So we're focused on getting to our 5 with that. So there are a lot of characters that we're bringing in, and each issue we try to highlight a new character and then a new person who's getting powers. So each issue has that kind of discovery for at least for that first arc. So we are going to go farther, and then by issue 5 we're going to tease the next group So if we move into issue 6, there'll be another group of 5 or 6 characters that are also getting powers. The idea is that we know of the initial people that are in contact with this strain that gives everybody superpowers, but by that 5th issue, the surprise will be, there's a lot of other people out there as well. This guy had passed it off to a lot of people, telling them they were getting the secret deal that nobody else was getting.
Right. Oh, that's great. Like, and I love, like, I imagine when Stan Lee or whoever, Stan Lee probably thought of mutants, right? Like, but when he had that idea, he must have been like, oh, I can just do this forever. Like everyone can
infinite
be a mutant,
possibilities. Yeah,
like,
definitely.
Yeah. I think that was probably one of the things that was very beneficial for Marvel at that early time to throw out, like, this can happen, like, in this world, this is a possibility. And then just having that there and it becoming such a staple, people of just being like the fact that you can, like, just make like Miss Marvel a mutant. They haven't done that yet, but I'm pretty sure they're going to, because that's how the way she's going in the TVs,
Yeah.
So, like, it's just cool that, like, these things can exist as, like, part of the lore. It's like a vampire or something like that. Like, it's like, well, vampires exist. Now, what are we gonna do with, like, the lore and the mythos of vampires, right?
Exactly. And once you read issue 1 and you understand that this special strain of marijuana gives people superpowers, it's like, okay, now I've got that. Let's move on. We don't ever have to re-explain that, so we can just constantly introduce new people with new interesting powers, and that's where the fun comes from. At the end of the day, it is a comedy of a comic, so that's where we get a lot of that comedy from. Is like the first time somebody experiences those powers, what is that going to be like?
Right.
Depending on how you develop that character and who that character is, you can get some really interesting opportunities for jokes.
Right. And I gotta say, it was, like, genuinely, like, very funny. Like, there was a lot of times I was just like, just very taken aback by, like, oh wow, that was, like, a very good joke. I can't
Awesome.
really
I
think of, like,
appreciate
any
that.
off the top of my head, but, like, just reading it, I'm just like, oh, like, this is, like, and comedy is so hard in comics because, like, you don't know what a person. Mike had a big eye roll on that one, but yeah, I mean, and we've talked about this with the Outer Space guys, but I imagine, like, there's definitely a point in that writing session where you're just like, is this funny? Or are we just insane? Like, are we just, like, tired from being up all night writing? Like, how do we know if this is any good?
Yeah, we were coming off of doing a lot of, like, sitcoms at the time, so I think we were definitely in that kind of, like, punchy joke thing, but it was a learning curve for us, the difference between a joke on screen versus a joke for a comic, because it's just coming across in a different way. You have to have the panel laid out the right way. Luckily, we started working with Tim Laddie, who's awesome. One of his best strengths is he understood the joke at every time. So he could nail it for us. Where, just working again, like with live actors or something, you'd be like, oh, that wasn't quite right. Let's try it again. Let's make sure that the camera's in the right place to sell the joke. He has to do all that heavy lifting for us because he's doing everything except for the script that we're giving him.
Right. Yeah.
So that made it easy in a way because he really understood the joke. And, like, that's always, like, the best starting point with a collaborator, is to make sure that they understand what the objective is and why the joke is funny and where it's going.
Right. Yeah. Mike, I would love to hear your takes on this, because you got a lot of smirks going on. So I feel like there might be some stories and some instances popping through your head.
Yeah, I was thinking of a couple of choice comments Tim Lottie has made to us when we would, like, send them scripts. But also just, off what Tim said, we were writing sitcoms, and, something we kind of learned both writing that and writing Superbud is that, like, the jokes are not hard for Tim and I to come up with, but if you make that the point of the story, then it feels forced. So we would always be like, let's just tell the story, and you and I both know we're going to find the funny moments along the way because these characters feel real to us and these interactions feel real to us, and some stuff would be taken from real life and some stuff would be taken from things that we, like, maybe heard about or witnessed or like just thought, like, oh, what if it went this way? But, a big thing that I think, like, we sometimes get confused with when people hear of Superbud is they think it's going to be this, like, everything's a joke, everything's a weed punchline, and they don't realize that there's going to be a story there. So a lot of times we get people who say, like, it was actually really funny. I was surprised.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was just like, and I don't know what it is, but just being like, oh my goodness, like I'm just genuinely enjoying this and just like feeling like I don't want this to come out wrong, but the writing is like a very advanced. Like this does definitely feel like it's like, and I don't know why you would take that wrong. More of just me being like, oh, I wasn't expecting it to be this good. Is that like the right
I
way to say
appreciate you
that?
saying that.
Yeah,
I
no.
appreciate
And,
hearing that. That's awesome.
like, and it's surprising to me that you wouldn't have more like influences with like Image Comics, because this does kind of feel like very like reminiscent of that time of like, and I was one of the first comics that I read when I really got into it was Kick-Ass, so that was kind of like my first dipping into the toe of indie comics, you know, and then like just seeing that, like using the idea of like a person who loves comic to set up that world, it's really nice because you're like, as a reader, you're like, oh, like what if I, like I'm not like Tony Stark at all, but I'm more like this kid who like reads comics because I'm literally holding one right now, it just like instantly sucks you in. It's relatable. I think it is like, yeah. And then you don't have to spend that time kind of like being like, I have superpowers. What? Like, again, I think that's just, people understand that we don't need to hear how Superman got his powers. I mean, whatever, Superman, I guess, didn't get his powers. He just was born.
Right.
But yeah. So is issue number 4 coming along anytime soon?
There's some art being made right now. One of the great things about Tim Lottie that is also the downside is he has blown up in the years since we started working with him, so he's pretty busy. Yeah. So we've gotten a few pages, and we're hoping to keep trucking along with that, because we definitely want to get 4 and 5 out in people's hands.
Awesome. Yeah, I would definitely recommend jumping on. I jumped on the Kickstarter for it. I just wanted to get a copy of issue number 1. So I'm really
thank you so much. That's awesome.
Oh yeah, no problem. I love having like physical copies of indie comics. Our buddy, again, Outer Space, they're sending us one. I'm like super looking forward to it. Again, I don't know if you can notice that I have comics on my wall behind me.
Yeah,
but
yeah, it's awesome.
It'd be nice to like throw you guys up there, throw some people that I've been able to have conversations with.
We'd be honored.
yeah, for sure. But so yeah, if you're listening and you haven't gotten to check out Super Buds, totally jump on it. It's definitely worth it. Heck of a good time. And I personally am super looking forward to the rest of the whatever you got with it. So I will take it whenever it comes.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, and then so when did Grave Brigade come along in the midst of all of that?
It wasn't long after, actually, that we started working on that idea. I mean, Tim and I basically have like a spreadsheet full of ideas that we've been trying to work on for a long time. And even when Superbud, that was the first one we chose to do as a comic, but we had probably 3 other ideas that we potentially were shopping around with each other. And Great Brigade was just the second one we started working on. And, the big thing is just like we do world building together. That's probably like most of our writer sessions are just kind of like fleshing out what the world is, what the characters are, how big does it go. And then, I don't remember when we did the first script, and we had an original artist for Great Brigade that we worked with, and we did an 8-page sort of like proof of concept to see how things were. And then we kind of just worked on scripts and story after that for a while, and then came back to it during quarantine, I think.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I could I don't know, I wanted to say this feels like a very good quarantine thing, like to write, of just being like, what if, because maybe it's like, I think this is definitely like a comic that's like, what's some crazy stuff that happened in life, so I guess with Tim, would you like to explain what this comic is about? I feel like I do a terrible job of explaining comics as a guy who has a comic podcast, but I'd love to hear it in your own words.
Yeah, sure. So Grave Brigade is the story about an elite team of soldiers that are on an off-the-books mission, so not officially recognized by the U.S., to hunt and kill monsters created by the Nazis during World War II. So it's pulpy. It's a little throwback to like those classic World War II war stories, but also old school monster movies, like the Universal monster movies. So we kind of just did a hybrid, putting those two together. kind of started with like, what would be really cool to see in action? All right, let's get some badass soldiers. All right, who can we have them fight? How about some monsters? What would be a good setting? We'll put them in World War II. Kind of seemed to gel with both of those. I kind of do this like pulpy throwback vintage kind of vibe. So it's like an action adventure mixed with horror. Each issue is going to be 24 pages and it's self-contained. So all 5 issues will tell one complete story, but each issue has its own individual arc, which is really cool. So if you happen to pick up issue 3 off a stand in a comic shop, you can read issue 3 and get a full story and feel satisfied with that. So or at least that's the idea. So each one is going to be self-contained and then they can connect. So we're kickstarting issue 1 right now. It is live. We did make our goal. So if you, thanks. So if you back now, you can help us get to our stretch goal. We just accomplished the first stretch goal. So everybody's going to get signed book plates with their physical tiers. And then we didn't even announce it yet. But the next one was if we can hit the $4,000, we will get print to go along with that based on our variant cover.
That's awesome. Well, hey, thanks for the exclusive. We'll make sure to put that out there for you. But that's awesome. I'm really happy to hear that you guys are making that because, it's just like I can't imagine it's easy to like with the internet. It's the best thing and the worst thing, right? Because it's easy to get things in front of people, but it's so hard to get people to like jump on board of things because there's 1,000 things that they could be jumping on board,
Absolutely.
So it's really great to hear that somebody like put out a goal and was able to meet it, So good job on you guys. Now, so are you guys like big fans of the like how would you say that, like the American mythos of horror comics and such, or are those tales that you enjoy?
I'm definitely a huge horror fan in general, and supernatural stuff as well. I can't say I've read. I feel like I only gravitated towards horror comics after college. That wasn't something I read as a kid. It wasn't something I read when we were in college. It was kind of more when I started getting probably recommendations from Rob and Brian at Brave New Worlds. They put me onto stuff like that. I don't know. What about you, Tim?
Yeah, the same. I remember horror comics being around, and obviously, like even before we were alive in like the 70s, there was like a really big push with like cool horror comics, but it was never really my jam until after college. I think like you started reading like Joe Hill novels, and then we got into Lock and Key, and then American Vampire, and like that kind of started us into like the horror comic. And then I mean recently there's a ton of awesome horror comics that are out. So that's really helped. Yeah.
I mean, like I enjoy horror movies, but there's a part of me that's a little bit squeamish. Like, and also like I have a hard time with movies just because I have a hard time committing. I'm scared that I don't want to watch this 2-hour thing and not enjoy it.
I'm the same way. I get that.
I'm just an insane person, but that happens. But I love horror in comic form because I feel like one of my favorite things when I do enjoy like horror movies is like being able to look at the thing that they made scary, like, and be like, how did you portray scariness? It's like taking those, like in a lot of horror movies, you're not doing long shots on the scary thing because it's jumping and then you're going back to the person's reaction. So it's only you get like a split second of the scary thing before it kind of transforms into something else. So that's a nice thing with comics is you can kind of sit there and like just take in all the details of it and in all of its gore and glory and just kind of, see what it's the terror of it all,
Absolutely. And that's something that's like been interesting to learn too, because I think we all grow up with horror, like naturally watching it on film. You learn how to do those kind of things. You learn to expect the jump cut and like where that jump scare is going to be and those kind of things. But like we have to figure out and like go back and study, well, how did they achieve that? Like what's the pacing like on the comic? Because it's a totally different art form. So that's what's been interesting to kind of try to learn and really dissect that. I know there were a few scenes that we wrote and Mike would be like, oh, I think the tension's not building quite right here, or the pacing's off, and we'd have to go back and retool it and make sure that like we got that part down, because that is so much of what horror is like the pacing and the timing of it all, and like the big reveal.
And I definitely feel like you guys did a fantastic job of building that tension of kind of just like there's something lurking. In this first issue, we're following the Brigade as they're off on an adventure, and it's just the whole time you're like waiting for the thing to catch up with them. I'm a big fan of werewolves. I like them a lot, so it was nice to kind of get to see them. I feel like vampires are very much like the hot ticket item right now, but I personally prefer my werewolves. So yeah, it was just nice to get like a nice little comic in there. I did want to say this, that my co-host Mad, he really loves vampires. So if you ever in the history of comics feel like you're writing a vampire story and need a name, Mark or Dylan would be a great name for him.
Will do.
So just a little thing. I think that
we'll
would
keep that in mind for our future issues.
There you go. But Mark or Dylan are not good names for vampires. They sound like very modern. If you ever write like a modern vampire story, do that one. But yeah, so I again, we reviewed that a couple episodes back, but I really loved it. I really loved the art. So shout out to Deborah L. For that one. She did a fantastic job on that. Just sat with it a lot and just soaked it up. And again, like I said this when we reviewed it initially, but it's the space in between for some reason. It's what, like, the shading I feel like was just very good. The way that everything was kind of just laid out on the page was very well done. I really enjoyed that.
Saying that.
Oh yeah, of course. So if you're out there and you haven't jumped on that because of the first time we reviewed it, now the second time you definitely have to do it because it's 100% worth it. Would love to see these guys meet their what is this, third stretch goal you said?
We're going into stretch goal number 2 now. Number 2.
Well then, heck, let's get to number 3. Let's not stop there. But I guess we are coming up on the closing up. I know, Mike, you got to be out of here at hard at 7, so we got some time. Anything you guys want to throw out there before we wrap up this bad boy?
I would just also shout out to Arthur, the colorist, and Dave Lentz, the letterer, because honestly, I mean, Deb obviously did an amazing job, but the entire creative team knocked it out of the park.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I couldn't be happier.
Yeah, right. Totally. One of the joys of making comics, like from our perspective, being the writers, is we write a script and we put it out there in the world, and then we slowly see it come back piece by piece. So it's like, okay, here's some sketches, here's like the line work now. All right, now it's got some inks on it, it's coming to life, and then you add colors, and you're like, oh wow, look at this thing, it looks awesome now. Now it looks like a real comic, and then you add the lettering in, and it's like, okay, this is what we were missing. We didn't realize you were missing all that, and it's like that's the final piece of the puzzle. So yeah, super awesome. Happy that we got to work with everybody on this project. We lucked out with this team, and hopefully we'll keep cranking out some more. We've got more on the way, so hopefully we can keep everybody together and make some awesome comics for the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great team. You guys are definitely a great duo. So looking forward to whatever it is. I know you said you got a spreadsheet of ideas, so I'm looking forward to seeing them come to life and have you guys come back on and chat them. And yeah,
I'd love to.
Yeah, absolutely. So where can people find you at?
I'm on Instagram, all things _Mike Dean. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, we're on like all the socials, but we pretty much just use Instagram. I know Twitter has a good in comic book world, but I just hate Twitter. But
we're in the same boat. Yeah. We were just talking about somebody else. I was like, well, I have a Twitter, but I haven't used it. I think I've logged in twice in the last year. I'm on Instagram as well. It's at Tim Rad Writes, because my last name is too hard to spell. So to keep it simple for everybody, you can find me TimRadWrites. And Superbud is at our website, which is superbudcomic.com.
Awesome.
And Instagram is the same handle.
Yeah. Yep, and I think I have I definitely have the links to the Kickstarters for both those comics in the descriptions. I'll throw in a couple more links because I know I saw Mike, you have a website. Tim, do you have a website as well?
Not at the moment. Yeah, I've got something in the works. We'll have a better one.
Okay. Yeah, but I'll make sure to add anything that I'm missing down there. But guys, I really appreciate you coming on. I really appreciate you reaching out to us and allowing us to dive into your comics. It was a really big treat. So thank you so much for that. Actually, I can end with saying this. Something that we do on the show here is we have a feature called the Banger of the Week. And I'm not doing this just because you guys are our guests, but genuinely, when I read Super Bud, I was like 100% was my banger of the week, and we also have a fun little audio. So
banger of the week.
So that's for you
awesome.
guys. Yeah,
Thanks
Super
so
Bud
much.
was definitely my banger of the week. Oh, it's just going to keep going, apparently. We're
That's
very
awesome.
excited about it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And thanks for having us on. This is really cool that you guys give an outlet to these indie comics. I know you guys review so many other indie comics. It's really cool. It's easy to get lost in the weeds, kind of like we were talking about earlier with the Marvel and DC books out there. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate like any kind of coverage for the industry as a whole, and appreciate you putting us on here. It's awesome getting to hang and chat.
Yeah. Hey, anything to support, just people coming up. I know what that's like. So I, put it out into the universe. Hopefully it comes back to you. And like, I've enjoyed great stories, like it's just been a privilege for me to just be able to like come across some really cool stuff, And again, you guys have great ideas. So like, why would I want to go to like other things when it's like great ideas are right here, So
well, we'll definitely let you know when the next one comes out then.
All right. I'm looking forward to it. All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming out. Make sure that you, if this is your first time watching, if you are new to the channel, make sure that you like and subscribe wherever you can like and subscribe. We're on all the social medias, as I just said, at pullboxpals. We're doing better at being on TikTok and making reels and stuff like that. But it's hard to be on social media. But anyways, thank you guys so much for coming out, hanging out, and Oh, actually, you know what? I just noticed I had one last comment from our co-host. Said, really enjoyed. I love that GB was in SB. Hopping off, guys. Have fun. Oh, he was heading out. Anyways, and so are we. And I have a little catchphrase that I say here at the end. Once I find the outro music, I say, I haven't read comic like these in years.